The great explorers of the Western world are now understood to have only discovered places where people already lived. But didn't they do something? Even if their exploits were falsely exaggerated, haven't they brought history and culture into the eyes of those who were ignorant before? Is that worth something? Well, our heroes today are much the same. Game characters treading well-trod territory, accused in their own time of being derivative, even cynical marketing vehicles. But do they have something more to offer us in our culture today? Let's find out. The reason I decided to play Tomb Raider was because I was really sick and wanted an action game that would mostly play itself. I had picked up the trilogy on sale for dirt cheap a few years back and tried the first one, but it didn't click. I think I was just in the mood for more complicated games then, but my energy levels have changed. As I blitzed through that first game, I found myself mostly interested about where it could go from there. The main character kept facing new challenges that felt like a good marriage of story and gameplay. The gameplay itself was thin, simple cover shooter with a little sneaking and jumping, but paced well. Each new sequence had art, sound, and dialogue that made Lara Croft feel like she was getting stronger as a hero, not just leveling up. I felt like I'd fallen asleep and missed something important. I clearly recall watching this game via a Let's Play circa 2013 after its release, but it was like the internet forgot about it right after. There's a few reasons for that lack of coverage that I'll touch on later, but the most obvious was the competition. Uncharted obviously took notes from Tomb Raider, but transcended its basic gameplay conceit to become a juggernaut of its own. A popular low-effort dig at Tomb Raider's expense was to call it a kind of cynical Ouroboros, ripping off the devs who ripped them off to begin with. But I wanted to dig deeper. Did these games meaningfully mature as their trilogies unfolded, and did they exist in conversation with each other? Uncharted 1 is a nice, simple game that can be beaten in an afternoon if you're familiar with its kind, but it becomes an impressive little artifact when considering the circumstances of its development. The PlayStation 3 had an infamously obtuse CPU architecture and shallow catalog of high production value games as a result. But as other developers struggled to even render a nice color palette, Naughty Dog dazzled the crowd with a leap forward in animation and environment art that looked years ahead of its time. It's easy to see where the art met the commerce. Sony, again infamously, got drunk with power and turned off the market with their overpriced, overpowered monolith. Of its many features, one of the few that interested the average consumer was the power to play high-fidelity movies. So, for a game company who already employed powerhouse animators and had been working exclusively within Sony's tech pipeline for a decade, making a game that felt, and not just looked, like a movie seemed like a match made in heaven. And that was a double-edged sword. The game sold great, and countless reviews praised its looks, but just like any belle of the ball, the wallflowers ate sour grapes and complained that she had no substance. Blah, blah, blah. While you were going on dates with Nathan Drake, I studied the blade. It is true that Uncharted is a game of 3 main systems: shooting, platforming, puzzles. And when directly compared to any good games in those categories, it has the depth of a spoon. But Uncharted, as a project, wasn't conceived just to look like a movie. It was intended to feel like one, so how does that translate? Uncharted has no filler. 0. Every single fight, every platforming sequence, every puzzle is easily distinguished from the ones before. It's a relatively short action game, but still longer and fuller in art than something like the Half-Life 2 episodes that were its contemporaries. That is still an impressive distinction to manage. I've listened to game commentators over the last decade bemoan the descent of AAA action games into endless open worlds of procedurally generated padding. So seeing a game like this, which still feels modern, offer both gorgeous art and a casual action gameplay loop, did impress me. It was a short experience, but just as I said Tomb Raider made me intrigued in Lara Croft as a character, Uncharted made me examine each piece of set design and animation, anticipating how they'd elaborate on them for the sequel. The core game systems are self-explanatory. What you're seeing here is what you get, but the pacing cannot be understated. Naughty Dog building all of these features and art assets from the ground up and not padding out any levels was and is miraculous. As a younger person, I preferred to bash my head against complicated action games, whether I was good at them or not, because I loved the vertical climb of improving at one interaction at a time. Now that I have multiple jobs, I get Uncharted. Nathan Drake might be a smug dick who blows off his problems with easy one-liners, but that's appealing as pure escapism. So in a post-Uncharted world, how did Tomb Raider compare as a new beginning? If Uncharted was made to capture the relaxing feeling of a fantasy adventure film where, everything's going to turn out all right, Tomb Raider was clearly positioned as a gritty movie you spend on the edge of your seat, wondering if this woman is even going to keep all of her limbs by the end. I'll try to obscure the upsetting imagery here, but it is extremely front-loaded. I didn't make it past the first half hour when I tried this game initially, not because I'm physically upset by violent imagery, but it just felt like I was getting no access to the characters or the setting in the middle of the noise. And in hindsight, it's easy to see how that happened. Crystal Dynamics were no new kids on the block, but making a game of this intensity and scale was a reach. And here's where the art meets the commerce again. Crystal Dynamics spent the 90s making the well-regarded Legacy of Kain games, which were tonally different but structurally similar to Tomb Raider. Their first few entries in this series had sales ending in millions, which sounds great. But it's here that the absurd reality of AAA entertainment crashes down. The mid-2000s saw decent sales figures for Tomb Raider, but its publisher and developers were hit just as hard as anyone by the 2008 global recession. They took a merger with Square Enix, whose 2009 corporate strategy document proves revealing. Quote, "Creating content like this is a difficult job at first, but we have made this difficult job into a formal business approach by adopting a model that enables us to earn from multiple outlets. On the other hand, Eidos, in principle, sells only games and rarely develops them into spin-off titles or across media. The Tomb Raider film ended up growing into a major business within the very limited licensing operations of Eidos. However, Eidos has basically only granted the license and did not earn much from content derived from the film. To Yoichi Wada, anyone who gambled on a new IP, kept its merchandising tastefully off to one side, and pleased their shareholders for 3 games straight, must have looked like one lucky bastard. So why not steal his bag? Tomb Raider's general structure of traversal gameplay, alternating with chest-high wall shooting, is modeled on Uncharted, but with key differences in feel. Most obvious is Lara's jump. It feels like the 90s in one button. If you can jump forward and redirect your momentum to land back where you started, the game is prioritizing the feel of its platforming over its realism. The main gripe against Uncharted was that its platforming felt too predictable, each prop laid out ahead of you like connect the dots while mashing jump. Tomb Raider occasionally presents a wall of handholds to mash through, but more often presents actual space to judge and jump across, and integrates its puzzle solving to mix things up. Uncharted puzzles all amount to look at these cool art assets and notice the pattern. Tomb Raider puzzles offer a few moving parts. They're more repetitive and look like child's play compared to a dedicated puzzle game, but they're smoothly integrated, feeling like natural parts of the enemy stronghold Lara needs to overcome. The weakest element of TR 2013 is its half effort at presenting an open world to explore. While the levels are physically wider than Uncharted, the only interactive elements are a sprinkling of resources usable to upgrade the numbers in your inventory, that and the collectibles that only exist to make their own number go up, without even the fun visual of like a spinning banana. As for the story, I will say this. Each scene gives Lara something new to do, from struggling just to stay afloat, to challenging her conflicted allies, to asserting herself against her enemies. She evolves quickly, sometimes too quickly. In one notorious sequence, Lara takes a human life for the first time, reacts with the horror one might expect, but then goes blasting through an entire level like she's Serious Sam. But then she vents about this to her mentor in a voiceover during an empty hallway. Not shockingly, screenwriter Rhiannon Pratchett said that this was a concession to the team's gameplay leads, who saw testers struggling through the game's long opening sequence with such limited mechanics, and I don't blame said gameplay devs for making an awkward choice. Prestige games like The Last of Us might have the budget and time to program and animate bespoke interactions for their quiet moments, but this game doesn't feel like it has those resources to splurge. The rest of the plot and the supporting cast sadly don't get enough screen time or involvement in the actual gameplay to do much. It's a fine ride, but I can't help feeling there was something missing. Lara barely relates to anyone. Could there have been some central emotional thread that got cut back for some reason? Alright, this one's kind of funny. The game absolutely positions Lara in a your princess is in another castle dynamic, which, given the psychosexual overtones of video games, forms a certain association. I feel bad saying that, but Sam has literally nothing else to do as a character, and the first time I felt any sense of personality from her was this one note, which has a strangely no-homo energy to it.
All Lara wanted to do was explore ruins. But who knew we'd run into so many cute guys? Certainly not Lara.
The Tomb Raider comics are completely tangential to these games, but if you're interested, they're worth a read. And the game ends having pushed Lara just enough to pique your interest. She's not a fully realized character with an arc quite, but she's developed her iconic skill set and seen such a distinctive, exotic locale that one wonders where her adventures might take her next around the globe, not unlike. If Uncharted stole Tomb Raider's bag, Uncharted 2 stole her entire wardrobe, and it did so by leaning harder into scene crafting and its environment art. In fact, this is patient zero for yellow paint syndrome. Turns out the yellow paint looks better when each level has varied, saturated colors that form a consistent design language. And it was here that Uncharted platforming finally clicked for me. It is easier than most 2D platformers because the game just refuses to let you jump off and die from most interactables. But because the devs eliminated the fail state from most interactions, it opens up mental space for you to think ahead. Props require different combinations of jumping, lateral and vertical climbing, swinging, and facing time limits. It is easy relative to its peers, but it's a good kind of ease, creating a steady, relaxing rhythm and breaking it up just often enough to keep you on your toes. While the combat is animated even better and generally serviceable, there is an upward trend in difficulty simply through the number of enemies per encounter. The level design for big set pieces is fun to engage with, offering different structures to duck between and better weapons to find, but but this puts too much pressure on the health system. Regenerating health is a slick design choice because it ensures players never get themselves stuck in a resource deficit. But to keep players from mindlessly running down every threat, the player health cap has to be low. So I constantly found the fun fights getting interrupted with 10 seconds of dissociating, because exploring meant taking pot shots from 3 guys. It's fair and manageable once you've got the level layouts in your muscle memory, but for a game loop so chill and smooth, it does stick out a bit. The story has enhanced its cinematic appeal by characterizing the leads according to how players engage with them. Nathan was criticized in his debut for being a self-effacing jokester who blasted hundreds of people away and never had a real problem he couldn't blow right past, and the sequel took note of this. He is still a cool fantasy cat burglar with 2 chicks at the same time, but he gets thrown in prison and beaten up and regularly outsmarted by people who take him down a peg. I never liked Nathan, but I stayed tuned in, never missing a beat. So, did Lara manage to stand on her own 2 feet in her sophomore effort? Rise of the Tomb Raider is one of the best arguments for video game sequels I have ever experienced. It's not the greatest action game of all time, but having squandered most of my life thinking about that category, I was shocked to wander into this game and suddenly wonder if it was a genuine contender. Not only does it expand upon every core mechanic of its predecessor with new systems, it followed up a heartfelt but messy screenplay with an absolute heater that never wastes a single scene or character. It was so good that I'm going to highlight the appeal of this game without spoiling any of its late game material. There is enough here for you to get the appeal and understand every system, and I hope that you approach it in your own time whenever you're in the mood for a feel-good adventure. Let's start with the story. Classic Lara was an unflappable character because the game wanted you to feel that way, in the vein of superpowered 90s movie heroes. She worked for that experience, and cramming drama scenes into those games wouldn't make sense. Reboot Lara was constantly in peril, but overcame it gradually, which made sense for a game about slowly upgrading your character's movement and combat abilities. The weakest element was the whole struggle to survive theme, in which you hunted a deer once and then Lara survived for the rest of the game off jerky in her pockets, I guess. Rise of the Tomb Raider manages a golden mean of a compromise. Lara is immediately more confident, dressed cool, fending for herself at every turn. She has to do the woman versus wild thing, but now the crafting and skill system is meticulously balanced to offer new interactivity at every level. Instead of just making the same numbers go up, you can collect and build new weapons that have different roles. Pick between spraying with an assault rifle or sniping, a big revolver or a machine pistol. Small but meaningful differences. And in a bold move, the combat has been made much easier, and it's more fun. How? Watch this right here. This button heals you. Takes 2 seconds. It doesn't slow you down to a crawl. And how often can you do it? Very. I've played other cover-based shooters that tried this compromise, but using a heal in Mass Effect, for example, it felt bad because the resource was so limited in number, and it was never predictable when the game would give you more. Here, collecting healing berries is easy, and you can absolutely run someone down while snacking on them. In a more linear shooter, this might reduce every combat to brute force, but combat in this game happens in a playground. The level design is so open. The feng shui is absolutely flowing everywhere. It's pretty trivial to knock people down with the bow, but that slight delay between bow shots is just enough to invite a more immediate approach. The first little sandbox area shows you how to pounce on someone, and that animation is just too fun to not do it again. And to further streamline things, the devs even implemented a threat highlighting vision system that I liked using. I usually hate these things because it turns all of the art into a bland things to click on, background to ignore dichotomy. But here, there's a third variable. Enemies who can protect each other are one color, isolated targets are another. That sounds too simple. Like it would eliminate all decision-making, but because the levels prioritize pathfinding, looking for branches to swing from and windows to hop through, eliminating that awkward, oh, the NPC's turned 90 degrees, can he see this guy, or is he just out of his view? Those moments work in dedicated stealth games, but here the stealth system feels remarkably close to one that Naughty Dog themselves would implement 5 years later. A genuine balance of enemy awareness where you can cut a path through danger and then fight your way through the level instead of waiting for everyone to funnel into you. That was my experience of the challenge curve, but for someone not in the mood for this particular tempo, taking a more blunt approach is doable. However, the constant tree of skills encourage new interactions like quick shooting 3 arrows at separate targets or dodging and countering with melee animations, so hilariously over the top they border on gun kata. I can think of no more active way to encourage players to try new things, and throughout the entire arc of the game, not only does the skill tree motivate different forms of engagement, but the antagonists do wonders for the marriage of story and gameplay. The bad guys in the last game were scary, but they were such sickos that it felt kind of like putting down a crazed animal, necessary but unpleasant. Bad guys in this game are basically G.I. Joe's Cobra. They are so rich and shamelessly evil that styling on them feels natural. Plus, every time you wipe the floor with them, you're doing a favor for the supporting cast. The small cast size from the last game has been even further streamlined. Instead of Lara's 6 friends who are each relevant when the plot needs them, you only have 3 supporting characters here. Lara's friend from the last game, and 2 new representatives of the local culture. Everyone else is an extra. That sounds limited. Like, how can you even have scenes with so few variables? Well, how about some world building? Again, I don't even have to spoil all the big reveals. In short, the devs pulled from real history and created a what-if fantasy culture rooted in some real traditions. They give a great breadcrumb trail of mysteries to uncover, and they turn that into a mechanic. So remember how Lara Croft is supposed to be an archaeologist? In this game, she gets to learn languages, multiple languages, and the game is not afraid to present you with a challenge that you will have to anticipate until later. You get both the delayed gratification of leveling up a language and the immediate gratification of picking up a prop, Shenmue style, and having Lara comment on it. While Uncharted's collectibles are beautifully modeled, they literally amount to shiny crap that feeds an achievement. Props here not only deepen the sense of human life and history in the world around you, they show Lara learning, stretching her imagination to understand the lifestyles of different civilizations.
Someone's poked a few new holes in it and filled it with dirt. They must have used it to grow seedlings. Must have been delicate work, mixing so many volatile components. They're far more decorative and lavish than I'd expect. But they're still well used. Whoever owned them was wealthy, but they rode with the army.
This game is still about a white British woman exploring foreign lands, and I admit that this premise will never appeal to some people living with the consequences of that real history. But this game doesn't awkwardly try to joke around white guilt. It touches on the human cost of imperialism in the landscape while showing its survivors thriving and supporting one another.
Help me, and I'll let the others know they can trust you.
We've got the repairs in hand, but I need some extra supplies from around the valley.
I believe we need that wisdom now more than ever.
Lara isn't their savior. They do her good turns, and she responds in kind. I'm not a historian, but this game made me feel excited about turning over every rock to discover something. The game has a handful of side quests, and they never repeat themselves. That's more than many open-world action games can say. Doing the same fun but repetitive task in a game with big explosions works, but here, each little NPC has their own life going on, and they need help from Lara because they're hurt, or old, or busy serving their community. I never blew off a single one of these quests because they didn't feel like pointless errands, and that even extended to the more complex puzzle solving. As in the last game, the devs did all the work of making numerous puzzle box rooms, and they made them completely optional. They're even more robust here, playing with verticality and timing, using the leading lady's iconic tool to make bridges and break open new paths instead of just shooting people. The puzzles are still no Talos Principle, but solving one here feels like snapping two parts of a machine together and watching it spring to life. Solving an Uncharted puzzle feels like finding the last piece under your coffee table. And finally, there is the platforming. It's tough to describe the appeal of something so kinetic, because watching footage of it, there's no gauntlets of precise jumps over pitfalls, no careful speeding up or slowing down, but what the game does present is a toolbox that is always fully utilized. Mashing jump between handholds is totally something they owe to Uncharted, but the variation comes in the structure. Platforming sequences in this game always let you see a few moves ahead of yourself. Executing each move is easy. Mash X to climb wall, press square to swing on rope. But you're constantly switching between these maneuvers. I kept feeling the tension of swinging across a gap because the game spaced them out in a staccato rhythm. Jumping off a rocky wall was exciting because they'd play with the camera, giving you better and worse views to your next target and alternating between movements. Wall climbing after an axe climb, into a handhold, into a leap of faith, are each just one button, but they're in-betweened with such slick animation that shifting through the mental gears gives you that gratifying loop of plan and execution. I find that Uncharted platforming leans much heavier on obscuring your view in order to create visual suspense, which is its own kind of fun, but the suspense here feels more gamey. The game has heart. That's the crucial thing that I feel coming across. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for its story to take a dark turn, for shock value, or for the levels to get repetitive and turn into a meat grinder of enemies, but it just never does. I will give Uncharted 2 their flowers for having much better scene transitions. That sounds like faint praise, but it does feel awkward when Rise ends a great scene with a sudden cut to black and then Lara teleports to the next level, while Uncharted 2 certainly has the more beautiful architecture and smooth execution, blazing through amazing sequences at dazzling speed. Rise of the Tomb Raiders miniature sandboxes have that playground feel of free movement, so intuitive and varied that encountering each new one, it feels like a window opening up. It's charming and surprising from beginning to end, and if the system mechanics appeal to you, it's a flawless experience. So, how did I miss it? The game's obscurity relative to its quality came partially from the deal negotiated by its financiers. After many years as a franchise connected to one console, they jumped ship to another. This has worked for other developers, but it didn't mean more power to develop with. It was just a better budget in exchange for mixed exposure. The series is today playable on pretty much whatever, but exiling a big game's direct sequel to completely separate hardware rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But hey, it's been a few years, we can appreciate this game's virtues, and surely the third game didn't have any other awkward transitions to make. Anyway, how did Uncharted do the next thing? Uncharted 3 is still impressive 15 years later, where its younger brother chased the cinematic flair of slick action movies. This game reminds me most of the amazing set design and stunt work of 1920s silent comedy. Those old movies don't have the texture and atmosphere we enjoy today, but their physicality is still breathtaking, and the stunts of Uncharted 3 might lose their pizzazz after a first playthrough, but that first playthrough is still worth the time. In the same way that the previous game varied its platforming and climbing sequences with subtle changes in props and geometry, this game constantly one-ups itself. Every set piece is another showstopper. Tiled rooftop chases, burning mansions, exploding ships, collapsing chandeliers, I could go on. But it's not all flash either. The story is thin, but a good thin, like prime rib. They give Nathan the same basic flaws and arc of Lawrence of Arabia, but the tasteful collection of supporting characters keep the surprises coming. My personal favorite was this guy. He's a history nerd and conspiracy truther in a series that has conspiracies under every rock. He's also a claustrophobic in a game that makes you crawl through tight spaces for every loading screen. Now that's what I call playing to your audience. The trilogy aimed higher and higher with its stunts, and I can still feel the muscle memory of those chase scenes in my hands a week later. Tomb Raider might offer a more diverse gameplay experience, but for any of you deciding which to spend your hard-earned money on, the Uncharted trilogy has a kinetic, immediate appeal. It feels gratifying and familiar. It's like riding a bike. So, does the last leg of Lara's journey have a more complex experience to offer? Tomb Raider? More like Town Raider? Oh, this is just weird. Of the 6 games I have discussed, this is the only one I do not recommend. So, what happened? The story starts with a good hook. Lara is doing her thing, and within the first 10 minutes, she is literally triggering the apocalypse by meddling with forces beyond her understanding. That sounds like a good escalation. Then it turns out the bad guys from the last game are trying to fix what she broke, and we have to travel to a new exotic locale. Gameplay puts an even greater emphasis on puzzles, which in this installment are breathtaking monuments of environment art, and combat, ever the weak point, has been scaled back significantly in favor of new systems, like towns. Here we are in town again. Okay, let's start with the good parts. Swimming. Have you ever booted up a game and said, "Oh boy, another water level"? No, never, ever. I've determined 2 main reasons why water levels are historically bad. First, visual blandness. The people who say Gen 3 Pokemon has too much water, they aren't talking about the amazing place full of riptides and sandbars. They're talking about the dozens of screens of flat blue tile. Shadow of the Tomb Raider put in the work to make their water areas diverse. You have ponds full of treasure, dark caves with eels and piranhas, and twisted passageways creating tension through limited visibility. The other big problem is air. Navigating complex 3D spaces with a time limit feels bad. That has been fixed by lighting up the air pockets to be extremely visible from any angle and breaking up the long underwater segments into smaller areas. The geometry always points you straight ahead. You never have to guess which way is up. So instead of threatening you with uncertain death, the suspense comes from the temptation to stop and collect treasure or hide from the predators. But the best part of the swimming is how well it's integrated with the rest of the level design. The most infamous water level of all time is so bad because it flips the game's basic movement upside down. Ocarina of Time made you swim for maybe 10 seconds at a time until the water temple, and then it was straight swimming for 2 hours. Or that's what it felt like. Shadow of the Tomb Raider saves water for its linear segments. When you're on land in this game, it's the more complex puzzles and platforming sequences with asymmetry and verticality. The water segments are straight hallways dotted with little points of interaction, and a couple rooms that have that old open the floodgates to raise the water level trick. And the colors are pretty, the lighting's good, the swimming animations are really nice, the underwater pickaxe parts are tense and exciting, and I sure am spending a lot of time talking about this because the rest of the game is a nothing burger on stale bread. Lara's adventure is just as outdoorsy as ever, but there are some small, living communities serving as pit stops where you can do side quests and buy things. On paper, that sounds like a functional game system that would add consequences and rewards for players who bother to explore. But functionally, this in-game economy is even shallower than Zelda, because you can never buy anything that opens up exploration, or even combat, really. You just trade vendor trash for crafting trash that makes your inventory and health numbers go up again, and maybe like 5 guns that are less differentiated from the default guns than they were in Rise of the Tomb Raider. But hey, that's not the end of the world. There are good games with shallow economies, so what else do towns offer to do? These side quests, well, remember how the side quests in Rise were short but sweet? You know, do an errand in the fun sandbox while your comrade in arms says something nice and offers you a little world building. Apparently, the way forward is to add 5 extra steps to every quest. In Rise, your introduction to the rebels was to find them gravely injured out in the field, making you curious about who they were and how they lived, and the instant that you arrived at their home, it was this truly secluded place with a magic, impossible climate. But before you could even take that beauty in, it was under siege by villains. And in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it is implied that the Paititians are in conflict with Trinity, the bad guys, but the Paititian screen time is so dominated by a civil war. The bad guy of this game actually has roots within the culture of your allies, making it a more complex and personal conflict involving the game's entire cast, and that's different. That's a good start. But the pieces of this game just do not come together. I will not rehash the entire plot, but let's highlight the awkward intersections of story and gameplay. Problem number 1. This game's not an RPG. Players have no input on dialogue or quests, so every character in the towns feels like they are bolted to the floor, waiting for Lara to do everything. Even when they state the important work that they're doing to save the world, it has to be done off-screen. You'd never run into someone out in the field doing their own thing the way they did in Rise. And problem number 2, the big mystery is just an Easter egg hunt. It's not a twist or anything when you finally arrive at the big reveals. After she accidentally triggers Doomsday 2012, Lara has to beat the bad guys in a hunt for a magic item. Last time around, the Easter egg hunt led to that hidden world of magic. The level design itself played with scale and weaponry in its climax that just had impossible proportions. It felt like an incredible escalation from human scale to something supernatural that you could actually move through and do something with. And the game earned that by spinning this elaborate tale of an immortal prophet whose teachings rent apart whole civilizations. It was an actual epic, a historic conflict that involved everyone from the Mongolian Khans to the Byzantine Greeks. And because it was a video game, they didn't dramatize it with endless cutscenes and plot, but used slick art direction, props, and a learning system mechanic that made it feel like a bigger world than it was. All of that harmonized to build tension and make those big reveals in the late game feel like rewards, meaningful to Lara's growth as a researcher and for the player for paying attention. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Lara practically walks into the secret society, and after 5 minutes of skepticism, the queen is all, "You're my number one boy, white woman." Which reminds me, this game also lingers on the subject of Lara's dad. So, Tomb Raider 2013 had this idea of Lara struggling to live up to her family name and not feeling self-confident. Then Rise expanded on it by having her struggle with grief about her father's death and their lingering disgrace because he was a serious academic basically trying to find the Philosopher's Stone. Yes, distinguished colleagues, the Elric brothers and I are right on the cusp of something definitive. But that was one layer of her motivation, and it worked well enough because it was supplemental. The fun was in exploring the world and uncovering new secrets. Backstory was just backstory. But here, an entire level is dedicated to a flashback, which starts off charming, and it makes you consider who Lara is and reevaluate how she got into this whole mess. But because the tone is now dark and/or serious, it ends by reminding you how Lara just wanted to be loved, and now she's all twisted up inside. And the bad guys are so intent on twisting the knife about her trauma that during the last act, Lara Croft goes full Ghost of Tsushima and a Punisher theme starts playing, and then nothing happens. Like, her friend shows up and basically says, "Hey Lara, you're not you when you're hungry." And then she's fine. And you can have a good action game with a flat lead character. Nathan Drake is a straight line, and he serves as the backbone of Uncharted. But how does Lara interact with the world around her? This brings us to problem number 4, the world building. The last 2 Tomb Raiders played with very soft historical fiction, like vengeful Japanese ghosts or Spartans in Siberia. But this time, the dev team pushed themselves to create a culture with an extra sprinkle of historicity. One of those big historical mysteries that's fun to think about is the missing years of the Maya civilization. Their amazing works provide a stunning snapshot of Mesoamerican history that just seems to up and vanish suddenly, like the Avatar. Most famous civilizations have a downfall narrative. The sack of Rome, the Meiji Restoration. Stories need endings. But the Maya historical record is famously harder to trace, which begets fun speculation that's good for fiction. And the game presents a fantasy city, descended from the Maya and the Inca, somewhere in modern-day Peru. And hey, they did cast a high-profile Venezuelan actress for one of the most important roles, which is probably about as close as you can get to this mishmash of histories. But yeah, if you're Latino, these accents are probably Breaking Bad levels of hilarious.
Oye, obvio. El licor de cerdo tiene los mejores tacos, pero la cerveza está caliente.
And even if you're not, the downside is that Mesoamerican people have descendants. Today, cultures are intermingled and complex, but it is easy to find families with roots older than European colonization, and that word we do not speak on this fine platform is still hurting some of those people today. To Tomb Raider's credit, the imperialism of the Spanish is portrayed as just that, one big cash grab soaked in blood. And even if this game is shallow fantasy, I do find its depiction of a Spanish galleon sunken in a hidden cavern, its hull crushed in a violent act of self-defense, to be an image that woke me up. It uses subtext here to break the narrative of the advanced Europeans crushing the helpless and innocent children of God living in the Americas. And moreover, the surviving Paititians have complex tools. They show off a variety of farming techniques and modern commerce that makes them feel like an actual culture, not a caricature of innocent angels picking berries off trees. So, with this solid foundation, where does the game go from here? Problem number 5 is the supporting cast. So, the character Jacob in Rise of the Tomb Raider had such a good game-like introduction. The player character gets captured, easily escapes, but then she has a fellow prisoner asking her for help. So what would anyone do in this situation? She helps him, and then he turns around to help her when she needs it later. It's a good delayed gratification, a chain of pleasant surprises. Shadow of the Tomb Raider opts to put Lara in a less heroic position, to put blood on her hands in return for all of that gamer-like looting and shooting that she's got on her resume. And I'm not angry at a video game for doing that, but they totally chicken out from committing to this. Lara does a bad thing during minute 1, and she spends the whole game saying sorry about it. I went to college twice. I don't need to play an additional white guilt simulator, because it's not even a sincere indictment of what Lara does. The gameplay loop is the same. The rewards are given to you unconditionally for breaking in and stealing, and even though Lara's best friend raises an eyebrow every time she shatters a priceless mural with her Minecraft pickaxe, the twist is that it's actually fine, because the bad guys are trying to break everything even worse than her, so what's a few more eggs in the omelet? And the biggest supporting characters, Unuratu and Etzli, get no good scenes. They are quest dispensers. They're, dignified ones with some backstory, but they get none of the internal conflicts and dynamic relationships that made Jacob and his family a joy to watch in every one of their scenes. And it's not so simple as pointing a finger at someone to determine how this happened. Development changed location from Crystal Dynamics to Eidos Montreal, but many of the creative leads jumped ship following the project. One of the only major absences is Rhiannon Pratchett, who tends to get the lion's share of the credit for reconceptualizing Lara and determining the overall narrative feel of the first 2 reboots. But even she didn't do so alone. All of her screenwriting had to happen dynamically in response to other developers. I am cynical about the evolving prominence of Lara's father and lack of self-confidence as major driving forces for her. I do think we can criticize that without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In one retrospective interview, someone asked Pratchett where she'd like to see the series go from here, after she had no involvement with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. She didn't comment on that game's plot in specific, but she did express a desire for some amount of humor and lightheartedness. It almost feels like they're trying to match the wall-to-wall set pieces of Uncharted 3, and the spectacular puzzles do genuinely work, but the apocalypse sequences are a total of a flood and a second flood. I guess the earthquake and plague of locusts had to get cut for technical reasons. It's a sadness, because even with the missteps, it's apparent that this game was not a cynical reuse of assets. There's almost nothing reused other than the core gameplay mechanics. But it feels like a disaster of compromises, and I hope that we can respect it as a clumsy first step in a new direction for an old industry. There are a boatload of Tomb Raider games which use real cultures as vague, generalized wallpaper. Even if you find this game to be totally offensive, its staff did take the plunge of developing a big action game and earnestly trying to study and portray a culture outside of their Quebecois studio. Unfortunately, it was a very expensive lesson, and the franchise has been dormant for a number of years now. The head of Eidos Montreal, David Anfosi, reflected in an interview just 6 months before the game shipped when its development was ending its conclusion, quote, "We have learned to work together. It's never easy, by the way. Collaboration at distance, 2 different ways to develop games, 2 different studio cultures. We have to be honest about this. It's never easy. Even here, we have 2 floors in the building, and even that creates a distance between the guys working together. It's never easy, but we developed tools and processes to diminish and decrease those problems. And building that new workplace culture likely ate up substantial time and money. It's no surprise to anyone who worked on it, relocating artists to a new country, merging complex development pipelines. No one wanted to do that while making an entire video game, but that's the economy that we continue to live in. Sometimes our icons get a glorious victory lap with every tool in the world at their disposal, and sometimes they struggle to make ends meet. But when their mission is to leap into the unknown and grab it with both hands, it'll only be a matter of time until they rise again. They rise again. You hear me, Crystal? We like that game, and I speak for everyone. So help me, if you show a reveal trailer and she has a sidekick or a parry system, I will write you such a strongly worded email. The time I spent with Nathaniel Drake only made me think of history's great explorers, in that they were probably chill, normal guys, but through the lens of history, all that remains now is their trumped-up exploits, so over the top that they evoke violent imperial impulses. But Lara Croft made me want to do things. She made me want to learn more about Mesoamerican history, or at least play more video games in a genre I hadn't bothered to explore before. I'd particularly recommend Ancient Americas, a channel I found in my surface-level research, and if you'd like to read any more behind-the-scenes documentary materials about the making of the franchises featured today, as always, you can find them below, in the darkness that I promise I'm pointing to.